Margaret Thatcher. She didn't leave Downing Street because she wanted to. She left because her own party did the one thing her political enemies never managed to do in 11 years. They made it mathematically impossible for her to stay. By November 1990, cabinet ministers who had served under her for years were walking into her office one by one and telling her the numbers weren't there, that she couldn't win the leadership ballot, that it was over. She sat through those conversations, processed what they were telling her, and then went back out and told the House of Commons she intended to fight on. She changed her mind overnight, announced her resignation the next morning, and was photographed leaving Number 10 with tears she was very clearly trying to hold back. The woman who had faced down the miners, faced down Argentina, faced down the Soviet Union, and faced down her own party's moderates for over a decade was brought down not by an election or a scandal, but by the people sitting around her own cabinet table deciding they'd had enough. She never forgave some of them. She said publicly years later that she had been betrayed. Whether you agreed with her politics or not, the image of her leaving that morning was one of the most human things she ever showed the world. If these stories are landing the way we think they are, subscribe right now and hit the like button, because the women still to come in this file only get more extraordinary, and you genuinely do not want to miss what's coming on this channel. Indira Gandhi. She lost an election in 1977, and most people assumed that was the end. The emergency period she had declared between 1975 and 1977, during which she suspended civil liberties, imprisoned political opponents, and effectively ran India as a one-woman administration, had cost her enormously in public trust. She was arrested after leaving office. She faced criminal investigations. The political establishment was fairly confident she was finished. 3 years later, she won the 1980 general election by a landslide. She came back so completely that the people who had celebrated her defeat had to sit across from her in Parliament and watch her govern again. That comeback is one of the most remarkable in modern democratic history, and it happened because she understood Indian politics at a granular level that her opponents consistently underestimated. She was assassinated in 1984, not by a political rival, but by 2 of her own bodyguards, which is a different story entirely, but the point is she never once considered staying down after 1977. The idea simply didn't seem to occur to her. Aung San Suu Kyi. She spent 15 of 21 years under house arrest in Rangoon, and the military government offered her a way out more than once. The condition was always the same: leave Myanmar and don't come back. She refused every time. She could have been free. She chose the house instead, because leaving would have meant abandoning the movement and the people attached to it, and she didn't consider that a real option. She won the Nobel Peace Prize in 1991 while still under detention, and her son accepted it on her behalf because she wasn't allowed to travel. When she was finally released and her party won the 2015 elections in a landslide, she governed through a proxy president because the constitution the military had written specifically barred her from the presidency due to her foreign-born children. She found a way around it anyway. The military coup of 2021 removed her from power again, and she was subsequently tried and convicted on multiple charges, sentences that her supporters described as entirely politically motivated. She is still in detention as of the time this file was opened. She has never publicly indicated she regrets any of it. Benazir Bhutto. She was removed from the office of Prime Minister of Pakistan twice, in 1990 and again in 1996, both times on corruption charges that she maintained were politically fabricated to remove her from power. After the second removal, she went into exile and spent years in Dubai and London, which could easily have become a permanent arrangement. In 2007, she negotiated a return to Pakistan with the government of Pervez Musharraf, and on the day she landed in Karachi, a suicide bombing hit her motorcade and killed over 150 people around her. She survived that attack. She kept campaigning. 2 months later, in Rawalpindi, leaving a political rally on December 27, 2007, she was assassinated. She had written letters before returning, naming individuals she believed would be responsible if something happened to her. She had told journalists she knew the risks. She came back anyway, because she believed her presence in Pakistani politics mattered more than her personal safety, which is either extraordinary courage or the clearest possible definition of refusing to step down even when the cost is everything. Yulia Tymoshenko. She was twice Prime Minister of Ukraine, and her political life has involved more dramatic reversals than most fictional characters manage across an entire story arc. She was a central figure in the Orange Revolution of 2004, the mass protests that overturned a fraudulent election result and brought Viktor Yushchenko to the presidency. She served as prime minister, was dismissed, came back, lost the 2010 presidential election to Viktor Yanukovych by a narrow margin, and then in 2011 was arrested and sentenced to 7 years in prison on charges of abuse of power related to a gas deal with Russia. She served nearly 3 years before being released in February 2014, the same weekend Yanukovych fled the country during the Euromaidan revolution. She came out of prison, went directly to Maidan Square, and addressed the crowd from a wheelchair because her imprisonment had left her with serious back problems. She ran for president again in 2014. She finished second. She is still active in Ukrainian politics. The number of times the political system has tried to remove her permanently and failed is genuinely difficult to keep track of. Park Geun-hye. She was South Korea's first female president, and her fall from power in 2017 was one of the most dramatic political collapses in modern Asian history. A corruption scandal involving her close friend Choi Soon-sil, who had no official government position but had allegedly been influencing policy and extracting favors from corporations for years, triggered protests so large that millions of South Koreans took to the streets. The National Assembly voted to impeach her in December 2016. She refused to resign before the vote, refused to cooperate fully with the investigation, and maintained for a significant period that she had done nothing wrong. The Constitutional Court upheld the impeachment in March 2017, removing her from office, and she was subsequently arrested and sentenced to 24 years in prison, later reduced. She was pardoned in 2021 on health grounds. The scale of the public anger against her and the scale of the street protests that preceded her removal were unlike anything South Korea had seen in a generation, and through most of it, she held her position until the constitutional process forced her out.
Angela Merkel. She did eventually step down in 2021 after 16 years as German Chancellor, but the story of how long she stayed and what she absorbed along the way belongs on this list. She survived the 2008 financial crisis, the Eurozone debt crisis, a refugee crisis in 2015 that split her own party and parts of Europe, a pandemic, and 4 different American presidents. She was written off politically multiple times and kept governing. The 2015 decision to allow over 1 million refugees into Germany was the most controversial of her career, and she absorbed the political cost of it without reversing course, saying simply that it was the right thing to do. Her party support declined significantly in the years that followed, and internal pressure to change direction or step aside was real and sustained. She managed it the way she managed most things, quietly and without drama, on her own timeline. When she finally left office, she did so by choice, having decided herself when the moment was right, which, after 16 years of people trying to tell her when that moment should be, felt like the most Merkel possible ending to the story. Dilma Rousseff. She was Brazil's first female president, and she was impeached in 2016 on charges of manipulating government accounts to hide a budget deficit before an election, charges she described as a parliamentary coup rather than a legitimate legal process. The distinction matters because the procedural question of whether what happened to her constituted impeachment or removal by political opponents who couldn't beat her at the ballot box is still genuinely debated by legal scholars and political scientists. She fought the process publicly and loudly, refused to resign when resignation might have ended things more quietly, and delivered a final address after her removal that was pointed and unambiguous about how she interpreted what had been done to her. Her successor, Michel Temer, her own former vice president, took office, and several of the politicians most involved in her removal were subsequently caught up in corruption investigations themselves, a detail that Rousseff's supporters noted with considerable feeling. She remained politically active after her removal and continued to describe what happened in 2016 as illegitimate. Imelda Marcos. The Marcos regime collapsed in 1986 when a popular uprising called People Power filled the streets of Manila, and Ferdinand and Imelda fled to Hawaii aboard American military aircraft. The scale of what was left behind in Malacañang Palace, the shoes, the jewels, the evidence of accumulation on a staggering scale while the country lived in poverty, became the defining image of the era. Most people in that situation would have stayed in exile. Imelda came back. She ran for president in 1992 and finished fourth. She ran for other offices. She won a congressional seat. She kept running, kept appearing, kept positioning herself and her family as relevant political figures in the country they had looted. Her son, Bongbong Marcos, ran for vice president in 2016, narrowly lost, contested the result, and then won the presidency in 2022 in a landslide. Imelda was in her 90s and watched her son take the same office her husband had held. The family's return to Malacañang Palace, 36 years after fleeing it, is one of the most extraordinary political comebacks in the history of any democracy anywhere in the world.
Cristina Fernández de Kirchner. She served as president of Argentina from 2007 to 2015, following her husband, Nestor Kirchner, who had been president before her. And her political story since leaving office has been defined by a sustained legal battle that would have ended most political careers permanently. She faces multiple corruption charges related to her time in office, including a case involving public works contracts that resulted in a 6-year prison sentence handed down in 2022, a sentence she is appealing. Through all of it, she has remained one of the most prominent and divisive political figures in Argentina, serving as vice president from 2019 to 2023, which meant she was simultaneously a sitting vice president and a convicted defendant appealing a prison sentence. In September 2022, someone pointed a gun at her face outside her apartment in Buenos Aires and pulled the trigger. The weapon misfired. She was unhurt. She was back in public within days. Whether her supporters see her as a fighter who refuses to be silenced, or her critics see her as someone who refuses accountability, the one thing both sides agree on is that she has not gone anywhere and does not appear to be planning to. Stay fascinated by the women who made power uncomfortable for everyone trying to take it from them. Stay curious about what they understood that their opponents never did, as we keep her files classified.